In the rugged hills of 1840s Kentucky, long before the world ever heard the word Appalachia, there was a family whose story was so twisted, so unsettling, that local folks refused to write it down. It vanished from the history books, not because it was forgotten, but because everyone who knew the truth wanted it buried. Tonight, we're digging into one of the strangest, most disturbing Appalachian legends ever whispered through these mountains. This is the forgotten tale of the 1842 Kentucky family that history tried its hardest to erase. Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss the stories we uncover here. And let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Before the rail lines carved their way through the eastern frontier, before the ridges of Kentucky were charted, claimed, fenced, or even fully understood, there existed a settlement so deeply hidden among the hardwood hollows that even its name survived only through fragments, half-remembered whispers, unfinished letters, and a handful of courthouse entries that appear, and then abruptly end. To speak of this place today is to follow a trail that refuses to stay still. Every record feels interrupted. Every family line appears to continue, then suddenly breaks. Every surviving account is marked by hesitation, as though someone long before us decided that certain matters were better left silent. And yet, in the winter of 1842, something happened in that settlement. Something that caused the last of its families to vanish from public record in the space of a single season. Not one grave marked, not one estate claimed, not one legal proceeding completed. Just disappearance. Quiet, total, and curiously efficient. This is the story of the Milbourne family, the most entangled, confounding, and long-buried tale in Appalachian memory. A story pieced together from forgotten documents, faded correspondences, and the testimony of those who lived just long enough to hint at what they had witnessed. What follows is an account reconstructed with care, each detail weighed, traced, and held against what little remains. It is not a tale of folklore. It is not a campfire invention. It is a record of something that unfolded along the Kentucky frontier at a time when isolation offered both protection and opportunity. And to understand what occurred in that hollow in 1842, to understand what happened in the winter of 1842, historians must turn to a single document, one that predates the disappearance by nearly 9 years. At first glance, it appears mundane, a regional travelogue compiled by Thomas Alwell, a field assistant who spent much of 1833 surveying creek beds for future use by timber merchants. Alwell was not a man prone to exaggeration. His notes were direct, almost dry. He wrote only what he saw, often in clipped shorthand, rarely adding emotion or speculation. Yet on June 11, 1833, his entry departs from his usual brevity. It expands into several paragraphs, longer than any other day in his book, and references an encounter that he seems reluctant to record, as though placing it on the page required deliberate effort. The entry begins with a description of the ridge trail as unnaturally narrow, a remark he had never before used. He explains that the path appeared worked, but only partially. Chopped roots, trimmed brush, but without the telltale signs of wagon use or repeated foot traffic. He notes it as curious, speculating that the trail was tended by someone who wanted it passable, only for themselves. He followed that trail for more than a mile before reaching a clearing he had not expected, a patch of level ground with a single structure at the far end. The Milbourne cabin. He describes the building with surprising attention. He calls it impressive in craft, but oddly positioned, turned slightly away from the slope as if avoiding something rather than orienting toward light or wind. The shutters were closed. The yard was empty. No smoke from the chimney. Allwell's next line is where the tone begins to shift. He writes, "It felt as though I had come upon a place that wished for no one to stand before it." For a man whose journal rarely stretched beyond simple measurements, this sentence stands out in stark contrast. He does not explain the feeling. He does not attempt to justify it. He simply records it and then continues. He approached the cabin door and knocked. No answer. He circled the structure, noting the peculiar arrangement around it. Stones placed in uneven lines, not forming a path but marking something. He could not determine their purpose. Then, as he prepared to leave, he noticed movement at the window. Not a full figure. Not a face. Just a brief shift in shadow, enough to convince him that someone was inside. He knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. In his next sentence, he writes, "I was being observed. I felt this long before I saw it." He does not specify who or what he saw. He only records that he backed away from the cabin slowly, choosing not to call out. The remainder of the entry details his return to the main trail, his steps described in careful, almost overly precise terms, as if he wanted future readers to retrace them exactly. But it is the final line of the entry that has fascinated researchers for decades. A line written in darker ink, as though added at a later moment. The family within was awake. They simply chose not to answer. This is the earliest surviving reference to the Milbournes being intentionally withdrawn from outside contact, and it raises a question that would remain unanswered for nearly 2 centuries. Why would a family, newly settled in unfamiliar country, avoid even the basic interaction that frontier life relied upon? There is no record of Allwell returning. No note that he reported his encounter. No suggestion that he attempted to revisit the homestead. But one detail in his logbook reveals something easily overlooked. The date, June 11th, 1833. A full 9 years before the Milbourne disappearance, and 3 months after an event that remains the most obscure and possibly the most critical piece of the family's history. An event known only through a single surviving court ledger, partially damaged by water, its ink blurred and its lines incomplete. The ledger contains the earliest legal reference to the Milbournes, and within it lies the first trace that something far earlier than 1842 had already begun to change the course of the family's fate. We begin long before the vanishing, when the Milbournes first arrived, and the land itself began gathering the story that the world would later lose. The area most often associated with the Milbourne settlement does not appear on modern maps. In the 1800s, it wasn't marked either, not even as a minor stop or a temporary cluster of homesteads. Surveyors avoided it, not out of fear, but because the land offered nothing of obvious value. Steep slopes, tangled undergrowth, creeks that cut in unpredictable directions, and a canopy so dense that travelers described noon as the hour of lantern glow. Those who moved through it left almost no notes except one observation repeated in different hands. Voices travel oddly there. Whether the comment referred to echoes or to something more unsettling, we cannot say. But it appears often enough in the surviving journals to suggest that the land carried sound in a way strangers did not expect. Into this quiet, disorienting patch of country came the Milbourne family in the autumn of 1824. Jonas Milbourne, his wife Eliza, their 3 children, and 2 relatives, whose connection remains uncertain even now. Their arrival is recorded in a clerk's ledger from Rowan County. Names entered neatly, occupation listed as land tenants, no remarks, no special notations. Then, for nearly 2 decades, the records fall away. The only hints of the family's life come from accounts written much later by neighbors who lived miles beyond the ridge. They describe Jonas as kept to himself, a phrase that in frontier terms meant everything and nothing. Eliza was remembered as watchful, a woman who seemed to listen to the woods as though they were speaking directly to her. The children were seldom seen, and the 2 unnamed relatives, sometimes called cousins, sometimes called workers, were mentioned only once in a note that reads, "The Milbourne men went into the timber before dawn and came out after dark. No one knew their purpose." Even by frontier standards, they were a family kept apart, unattached to church, unaffiliated with local guilds, absent from social gatherings, and never present at the courthouse except for the brief moment that marked their arrival. Yet no one questioned them. Not then. Frontier life rewarded privacy. And the ridge, for reasons unclear, seemed to encourage it. Over the years, travelers reported seeing the faint glow of the Milbourne cabin from the far side of the valley, always a single light, unwavering. No smoke, no movement around the homestead, no livestock roaming the clearing. Just a distant, motionless shape of habitation in a place where few dared linger. Then, in early 1842, the sightings of that light stopped. Not dimmed. Stopped. And 3 weeks later, January 17th, 1842, the first of the county reports was filed, a routine inventory check, noting that property at the ridge was unattended. Nothing unusual. Such notes were common, especially after storms. But within the next 2 months, 7 more entries appeared, each written by a different hand, each indicating something slightly more urgent. No occupants observed. Ground appears undisturbed. Cabin intact, but without sign of habitation. Livestock absent. Stillness noted. Stillness noted. A strange phrase for a clerk to record. What do they mean by it? Why choose that word? We do not know, but it marks the beginning of the break in the Milbourne story, the point at which the family no longer appears in any document, any registry, or any living account. And so we return to that simple, lingering question. What happened on the ridge in 1842? To answer it, we must follow the fragments backward, to the earliest sign that something in the Milbourne settlement was already moving toward a conclusion long before the family vanished. The ledger that offers our next clue is stored today in a controlled archive, sealed behind glass to prevent further deterioration. It is a thin volume, less than 40 pages, bearing the stamp of the Fayette County Courthouse, 1833. Its edges are warped, the pages water-rotted, the ink uneven and partially leached away. Yet on page 17, the date still reads clearly, March 4th, 1833. A single entry written in the precise looping script of clerk Samuel Kell stands out from the surrounding lines. All other entries that day concerned livestock transfers, boundary disputes, and routine debts. Only one refers to the Milbourne family. It reads, "Petition received from Mr. J. Milbourne regarding the matter of..." The sentence ends abruptly. The ink trails off, the rest is lost. The next line begins a new entry entirely unrelated, suggesting that Kell had intended to return and finish the record. He never did. There is no attached petition, no accompanying names, no clarifying notes. Whatever Jonas Milbourne brought to the courthouse that day, whatever concern, request, or grievance he wished to put into the hands of the law, vanished with that missing half of the line. Historians have attempted to reconstruct what the petition might have been based on surrounding pages. It was not tax-related. Those forms were filed separately. It was not a marriage declaration, nor a guardianship claim, nor a deed. Kell used the word matter rarely, reserving it for disputes that required judgment rather than routine processing. A matter of what? Land, violation, inheritance? Something witnessed? Something found? We cannot know. But the date is significant. March 4th, 1833. The day Jonas appeared at the courthouse with a petition he never resubmitted. June 11th, 1833. The day Thomas Alwell approached the Milbourne cabin and found a family unwilling to open the door. Both events occurred within 3 months of each other. It is the only period in which the Milbournes appear in public record twice, and the last time Jonas Milbourne is ever documented interacting with local authority. After that, the family retreats into silence so complete that their very existence becomes a matter of passing reference rather than community presence. But the ledger contains one more detail, a minor notation written by Clerk Kell in the margin next to the unfinished line. Nearly invisible unless the page is turned against the light. His small handwriting, faint but still legible, says, "Uncertain validity. Submit for review if returned." Uncertain validity. This suggests that whatever Jonas presented was unusual, perhaps incomplete, perhaps unclear, perhaps difficult for Kell to process or categorize. And then, Jonas never returned with clarification. Not that month, not that year, not ever. The absence raises a question that has troubled researchers. Why would a man travel to the courthouse, begin a formal petition, and then refuse to finish it? Even when prompted? Whatever Jonas brought with him that morning, it appears he changed his mind before the ink had even dried. Or, more unsettling still, something changed his circumstances so quickly that returning to complete the petition became impossible. This brings us to the next surviving document connected to the Milbourne name. Not a ledger, not a journal. A letter. A letter written by a woman who lived more than 5 miles from the ridge, and yet claimed to hear something on the night the petition was abandoned. A letter whose contents were never meant for public record at all, but survived only because it was tucked inside her family Bible. Discovered more than a century later. In that letter lies the first description of an event that no one in the region spoke of openly, not even years afterward. And the date at the top places it only 2 nights after Jonas's unfinished petition. In 1921, during the clearance of an estate near the Kentucky-Virginia line, a wooden chest was found beneath a collapsed section of attic flooring. Inside were quilts, children's clothing, several hand tools, ordinary belongings with no particular historical merit. But at the bottom of the chest rested a worn family Bible, its pages stiff with age, its cover split along the spine. Inside that Bible, pressed between the Book of Ruth and a list of family births, lay a folded sheet of paper. The letter was dated March 6, 1833, 2 days after Jonas Milbourne attempted to file his petition. The author was Martha Henton, a neighbor in frontier terms, though she lived more than 5 miles from the ridge. The letter was addressed to her sister in Johnson County, but for reasons unknown, it was never sent through the post. The handwriting is tense, words pressed too hard into the paper. lines that curve slightly rightward, suggesting hesitation or correction. At the top, Martha writes, "I do not trust the men here to carry this, so I leave it with Scripture instead." Her account begins with a straightforward description of the evening. Clear sky, steady wind, the sound of her livestock shifting restlessly. Nothing unusual for early March. She notes that she had settled her children, fastened the shutters, and was preparing to lay the fire down when she heard something she could not identify. Not voices, not footsteps, not the cry of an animal. She describes it only as a carrying sound, a low, drawn-out tone that seemed neither distant nor near but suspended somewhere between. She claims it moved along the ridgeline, as though following the shape of the hills, and then passed through the hollow where the Milbourne homestead lay. She writes, "It did not stop at their place. It paused, as if waiting for answer." Martha states that the sound continued for nearly a minute before fading into the timber, direction unknown. Her children did not wake. Her husband, away on a trading route, was not present to hear it. Her letter then shifts. The next lines are shakier, written with uneven pressure. "There was a light, faint, low to the ground. It glimmered once, then again, then went out." She does not specify where she saw it, only that it belonged to the family on the ridge. She had seen their lamp glow before, but never so close to the ground, and never moving. The remainder of the letter grows increasingly reluctant, as if she is fighting her own memory. She writes, "I told myself it was the father making rounds, though I have never known him to be out at that hour. Still, the thought eased me. Yet I cannot dismiss the sound. It was like nothing I have known in all my years here. I know the way noise bends between these hills, but this did not bend, it followed. Someone should go to them, but I will not." The final line, written at the bottom edge of the page, seems almost accidental, as though added moments before she folded the letter and hid it within her Bible. If they answer that sound, I pray they do so with caution. This letter is the only contemporary account describing an unusual event near the Milbourne homestead before their later disappearance. It establishes three things with certainty. Something occurred near the ridge on the night of March 6, 1833. The Milbournes were awake during that event. Whatever passed through the hollow was not recognized by someone well accustomed to the natural noises of frontier life. But what did Martha hear? What did she see? And more urgently, how does this connect to Jonas's unfinished petition filed just 2 days earlier? For answers, historians turn to a document written not by a neighbor, but by someone else entirely. A relative. A woman whose connection to the Milbournes had long been dismissed as rumor until evidence surfaced that she had visited the ridge during that same month. A woman whose journal contains an entry dated March 12, 1833, the last time she was known to have seen the family,